My sister and I used to be inseparable. She's older than me, but for most of my life, that didn't matter. We were more like best friends than siblings. Please stay with me. As I tell you my story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for your support. Means the world to us. Back to my story. We'd whisper secrets under the covers late at night, talk about the kind of weddings we wanted one day, and promise that no matter what, we'd always stand by each other's side. So when I met the man who would become my husband, it felt natural to include her in everything. She wasn't dating anyone at the time, and she didn't have many close friends. I thought involving her in our dinners, outings, even simple movie nights would make her feel loved and connected. At first it seemed to work. She came along, laughed at his jokes, and smiled through most of it. But sometimes, her laughter felt a little forced, her smiles too stiff. There were moments when she'd sit back quietly, watching rather than joining in. I brushed it off, telling myself she just needed time. Looking back, maybe I should have noticed the shift sooner. Maybe I should have seen how being the third wheel was eating at her. Even if she never said it out loud, I thought I was helping her feel included. Instead, maybe I was unintentionally highlighting what she didn't have. Still, I believed that love, our bond, was stronger than jealousy or discomfort. I truly thought nothing could break us apart. But the truth is, everything began to change the moment my fiancé proposed. What should have been the happiest time of my life slowly turned into the unraveling of the relationship I valued most. I just didn't know it yet. The cracks started showing almost immediately after he proposed. At first, it was little things. Snide comments slipped into phone calls, a shift in her tone whenever I mentioned wedding plans. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. She called me nearly every other day, not with congratulations or excitement, but with complaints. She told me no one was helping her with my bridal shower, that she felt like it was all too much, that somehow I was making her life harder just by getting married. I tried to reassure her, tried to pitch in to make things easier, but no matter what I said, she made me feel like I was a burden. I'd hang up the phone and sit in silence, confusion churning in my chest. Wasn't she supposed to be happy for me? Wasn't this the kind of moment we dreamed about when we were kids, imagining each other's weddings? The tension only grew. Planning things that should have been joyful dresses, flowers, venues, turned into a minefield. I felt like I had to walk on eggshells around her, constantly second-guessing whether sharing my excitement would push her further away. I told myself it was stress. Weddings brought out the worst in people. Right, maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she was scared of losing me to my new life. But deep down, I started to feel something I never thought I'd feel toward her. Resentment. Every time she sighed over the phone, every time she acted like my wedding was some kind of inconvenience to her, a part of me wondered if our closeness had been more fragile than I believed. And as the months passed, I realized these cracks weren't going to heal. They were only spreading. My bachelorette party was supposed to be fun, lighthearted, a celebration before the big day. I pictured laughter, dancing, and memories I'd treasure forever. Instead, it became another battlefield in this silent war between my sister and me. From the moment she arrived, her energy was off. She barely smiled, rolled her eyes when my friends cheered, and clung to her drink like it was the only thing keeping her there. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on enjoying myself, but it didn't last long. Halfway through the night, she cornered me in front of the others. Her voice was sharp, dripping with accusation. "He's controlling you, can't you see it? He doesn't let you breathe without a say-so." The room fell silent. My bridesmaids stared at her in shock, some with anger flashing in their eyes. My stomach dropped. Of all nights, of all places, she chose this moment to attack not just me, but the man I was about to marry. I felt my face heat up with humiliation. I wanted to defend him, to tell her she was wrong, but the words tangled in my throat. My friends stepped in instead, firing back at her, which only made things worse. Voices rose, sharp and cutting, until the party atmosphere was gone, replaced by tension thick enough to choke on. By the time the night ended, I wasn't laughing or celebrating. I was exhausted, humiliated, and angry. My own sister had turned what should have been one of my happiest nights into a memory I wanted to erase. I went home that night with a pit in my stomach, realizing something I never thought I'd have to admit. Maybe my sister wasn't happy for me at all. When the day of my wedding finally arrived, I told myself I wasn't going to let anything ruin it. Not the stress, not the little details, not even my sister. I put on my dress, took my vows, and smiled through the ceremony. For a while, it felt like everything I'd dreamed of. But then came the maid of honor speech. She stood at the microphone, holding her champagne glass. And I braced myself. This was the moment I thought she'd redeem herself, where she'd speak from the heart. Remind me of our bond, maybe even make me cry happy tears. Instead, her words were flat, cold, almost rehearsed. She talked about the bride like I was a stranger. No stories about our childhood. No heartfelt memories, no warmth at all. Just generic lines that could have been copied and pasted from a wedding website. It stung, not because the words were bad, but because they were empty. I glanced around the room, noticing the awkward looks from guests. My new husband squeezed my hand under the table, trying to steady me, but I felt the tears sting the back of my eyes. This wasn't the speech of a loving sister. It was the speech of someone who didn't care enough to try. I smiled politely, even clapped when she finished. But inside, my heart sank. On the happiest day of my life, my own sister had found a way to remind me of the distance between us. Later that night, when the music played and everyone danced, I caught sight of her sitting off to the side, expression unreadable, and that's when it hit me, our closeness. The bond I had always counted on wasn't just strained, it was breaking. And maybe it was already broken. After the wedding, I told myself things would get better. Maybe the stress had been too much for her. Maybe the tension would fade once the dust settled. I wanted to believe the sister I knew was still there, buried under all the bitterness. Then I got pregnant. The day I saw the test, I cried tears of joy. My husband and I were over the moon, and one of the first people I wanted to tell was my sister. Despite everything, I thought this news would bring us back together. I imagined her hugging me, maybe even crying with happiness, just like I would have if it were her. But when I told her, she went silent, just a faint "oh," followed by a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. And then nothing. Days turned into weeks. And not a single call, not a single text. For 6 long weeks, she completely disappeared from my life. At first, I worried something had happened, but I knew the truth. She and her fiancé had been trying for years without success. My joy was her wound, and instead of sharing in it, she chose to shut me out. I tried to understand. I told myself it wasn't personal, that she was hurting, but deep down, it felt like abandonment. Once again, during one of the biggest milestones of my life, my sister wasn't there. The silence spoke louder than words. I carried my pregnancy glow, while carrying the heavy truth that the person who should have been my biggest cheerleader was instead my biggest absence. And as my belly grew, so did a realization I didn't want to face. My sister and I were drifting into 2 separate worlds, and she didn't seem to care enough to stop it. When my sister got engaged, I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me was happy for her, despite everything. She deserved love too, but another part of me braced for the storm, wondering if her wedding would become a repeat of the tension mine had stirred up. So when she sat me down and asked me to be her maid of honor, I was stunned. For a moment, I just stared at her, waiting for the catch. After everything, the cold speech at my wedding, the 6 weeks of silence when I shared my pregnancy news, I couldn't imagine why she'd want me standing at her side. But she asked with a smile, and I heard myself say yes. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was to save face in front of the family, or maybe a part of me still hoped this was her olive branch. I told myself it was a chance to mend what was broken, and so I threw myself into it. I helped her scout venues, scroll through endless lists of photographers, and I even went dress shopping with her. I love planning events, so it wasn't hard for me to get excited about the details. For once, there weren't fights or accusations. She seemed calm, even appreciative. I started to believe maybe we were turning a corner. Maybe this was her way of showing me she wanted me back in her life. But as the months went on, small choices she made left me uneasy. Little things she said, little digs she couldn't resist slipping in. I ignored them at first. I wanted to believe this time would be different. I should have known better. Not long into the planning, my sister made an announcement that caught me off guard. "No kids allowed," she said firmly, as we sat going over the guest list. "Except for his daughter, of course." I nodded quickly, not wanting to make it a big deal. It was her wedding, her rules. I understood. Some brides wanted a child-free atmosphere, and I respected that. I even started making arrangements for my daughter, lining up childcare, so I could fulfill my maid of honor duties without worry. But deep down, it stung a little. My daughter adored her aunt. She talked about her often, asked when she'd get to see her again, and would light up whenever her name came up. I hated the idea of explaining that she couldn't be part of the celebration, especially when another child, her fiancé's daughter, would be front and center. Still, I told myself to let it go. It wasn't worth another fight. If no kids were allowed, then it was fair across the board. My daughter was still young. She wouldn't understand much about weddings anyway. But the truth was, I had a pit in my stomach that I couldn't quite shake. I tried to silence it by reminding myself that this was a fresh start for us, that saying yes to being maid of honor was a step toward repairing our bond. I told myself not to read too deeply into her decisions. She had promised it was a kid-free wedding, and I took her at her word. At least I did, until I found out the truth. A week before her bachelorette party, I was chatting with one of the bridesmaids about travel plans when she mentioned something that made my stomach drop. "Oh, the kids are so excited for the wedding," she said casually, listing off names I didn't recognize. At first, I thought I'd misheard. "Wait, kids?" I asked. She nodded, smiling. "Yeah, 3 of them. They're not family, just friends of the groom's side. But they wanted them there, so your sister agreed." I froze. My pulse quickened, my mind racing back to that conversation when my sister had told me no kids allowed. I had nodded, respected her rules, even made arrangements for my daughter. Yet here I was, finding out that wasn't the truth at all. I felt my face flush with anger. It wasn't about it being a child-free wedding anymore. It wasn't about the rules. It was about my daughter, my sister's only niece, being singled out and left out on purpose. That night, I barely slept. My daughter had been asking me questions for weeks about the wedding. She wanted to see her aunt in a beautiful dress, wanted to dance, wanted to be part of it. And I had told her no, because there were no kids allowed. But now I knew the truth. My sister hadn't just excluded children in general, she had excluded my child. The next day was her bachelorette party. I went, plastered on a smile, and went through the motions. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh, posed for pictures, toasted when I was told to. But inside, my anger burned. I didn't ruin her party, I didn't say a word. But I promised myself I would.